My golden child brother threw a 1% share of the family farm at me like a dog bone, just to humiliate me at the will reading. He stopped laughing when the corporate lawyers explained what a unanimous veto clause means. It was a Tuesday afternoon, heavily overcast, inside a sterile, hyper-modern law office in downtown Philadelphia. The air conditioning was running too high, making the room feel like a meat locker. I sat on one side of a massive, polished mahogany conference table, shivering in a worn-out, pilled gray cardigan. Sitting directly across from me was my older brother, Preston. He was wearing a custom-tailored $4,000 Brioni suit. His hair was perfectly styled, and he casually adjusted the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist, projecting the aura of a man who owned the entire building. The estate lawyer, a nervous-looking man in wire-rimmed glasses, had just finished reading the final division of our late father's assets. Preston didn't just take the lion's share, he took the entire pride. He had maneuvered the legal framework to absorb 99% of our family's sprawling 500-acre estate. But he couldn't just leave it at that. Preston needed to twist the knife. He reached across the mahogany table and used his index finger to slide a single, crisp piece of paper toward me. It was the LLC operating agreement, showing my ownership stake. Exactly 1.00%. Preston let out a low, cruel chuckle. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers together. "Don't spend it all in one place, Maya," he smirked, his eyes cold and dead. "Consider it a charity tip for all your hard work around the house." I want you to freeze the frame right there. Look at his smug, perfectly moisturized face. Look at the absolute intoxicating joy he felt in reminding me that I was legally and financially nothing to him. He thought that one piece of paper was my collar. He had absolutely no idea that the piece of paper he just slid across the table was a loaded gun, and he had just handed me the trigger. But to understand how an arrogant investment banker legally detonated his own $40 million mega deal just so he could mock his little sister, we need to rewind. Before I take you back to the very beginning of this nightmare, please take a quick second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, but only if you believe that karma is best served ice-cold and legally binding. Also, drop a comment down below and let me know, where in the world are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? I read every single one. Now, let me tell you how I became the silent architect of my brother's absolute ruin. My name is Maya. Long before the corporate boardrooms and the multi-million-dollar land developers, my entire world was defined by the smell of pine needles, wet earth, and motor oil. I grew up on Oakhaven Estate, a stunning, sprawling 500-acre property in rural Pennsylvania. It had been in our family since 1960, purchased by our grandfather. It was a massive tract of rolling hills, dense timber forests, and a beautiful, albeit aging, stone farmhouse. But 500 acres of land is a living, breathing beast. It requires constant, back-breaking labor to maintain, and for the last 15 years of my life, I was the one breaking my back. When I was 19, our father Richard suffered a severe stroke that left him partially paralyzed and wheelchair-bound. I had just been accepted into a nursing program at a state university. I remember holding the acceptance letter in the kitchen, crying, before carefully folding it up and throwing it into the trash can. I unpacked my bags, stayed at Oakhaven, and became his full-time caregiver and the sole caretaker of the estate. If you looked at my hands back then, they were rough, calloused, and constantly covered in tiny cuts from repairing fence lines, chopping firewood, and pushing a heavy wheelchair over gravel driveways. And where was my brother Preston during all of this? Preston had left for Manhattan the very second he turned 18. He went to a prestigious business school, paid for by our father, and aggressively climbed the ranks of a cutthroat Wall Street investment bank. Preston didn't do dirt. He didn't do sick relatives. He only visited Oakhaven exactly once a year, usually for 3 hours on Thanksgiving. He would arrive in a leased Mercedes, smelling strongly of expensive Tom Ford cologne, wearing Italian leather loafers that he refused to get muddy. He would snap a few carefully curated photos with our disabled father to post on his social media to look like the doting, grounded family man, and then he would speed back to New York. But here is the most agonizing, soul-crushing part of the story. My father worshipped him. Richard was an old-school, deeply traditional man who equated human value entirely with financial status. He viewed my 15 years of grueling, unpaid sacrifice as a basic expectation. I was a woman, therefore I was meant to be the caregiver. But Preston? Preston was a titan of industry. I remember one specific, freezing January evening that permanently shattered my heart. I was in the living room, kneeling on the hardwood floor, manually massaging my father's swollen, atrophied legs. The phone rang. It was Preston on speakerphone, loudly bragging about a massive six-figure holiday bonus he had just received at his firm. My father's face lit up with a level of pure, unadulterated joy and pride that he had never, ever directed at me. "That's my boy," Richard beamed into the phone. "A born winner. You're going to rule the world, Preston." When the call ended, the room went quiet. I continued massaging his calves in silence. My father looked down at me, his expression shifting from joyous pride to a look of dull, pitying disappointment. "Your brother is a winner, Maya," he sighed, shaking his head slightly. "He has the killer instinct. Well, you just don't have the stomach for success. You're soft. It's a good thing you're here to do the chores, because you'd get eaten alive in the real world." I stopped moving. I kept my head bowed, staring at the floorboards, as a hot, agonizing tear slipped down my cheek and hit the wood. He didn't see it. He didn't care to look. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth of my existence. To the man I had sacrificed my entire youth to keep alive, I was completely invisible. I wasn't a daughter. I was the hired help. Let me pause right here and step out of the story for a second. Have you ever sacrificed your own life, your dreams, or your youth to care for a parent, only to watch them absolutely worship a golden child sibling who never lifted a single finger to help? How did you cope with that feeling of profound, devastating injustice? How do you survive being invisible in your own home? Tell me your story in the comments below. Trust me, getting it out into the open helps. Now back to the story. Because when my father finally passed away, Preston didn't just come to claim the crown. He came to make sure I knew my place. My father passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years ago. At the funeral, while I wept silently in the front pew, Preston spent the entire service standing in the back of the church, aggressively typing emails on his phone. He wasn't mourning a father, he was calculating an inheritance. Within days, Preston brought in a team of sleek, aggressive Manhattan estate lawyers. Because my father had never updated his ancient, vague will, Preston used his high-priced legal team to bully his way through probate court. He effectively argued that because he had occasionally sent financial support, a few $100s here and there, he was the primary benefactor. I was too exhausted, too grief-stricken, and too broke to fight him in court. Preston decided to consolidate the 500-acre property into a corporate entity, Oakhaven Holdings, LLC. Legally, he could have just bought me out. He could have written me a check for $50,000, forced me to sign away my meager rights, and taken 100% of the company for himself. It would have been cleaner, faster, and completely legal. But Preston was a textbook narcissist, and a narcissist doesn't just want to win. They need an audience to watch them win. A week after the funeral, Preston called me into our father's old study. The room still smelled like his pipe tobacco and old leather. Preston was sitting behind the massive oak desk, his feet propped up. "I've instructed the lawyers on how we are structuring the LLC," Preston said, tossing a pen onto the desk. "I am taking 99% of the voting shares. I am the managing director. But I am keeping you on the shareholder list at exactly 1%. I looked at him, confused. Why? Just buy me out, Preston. Let me take whatever small amount is mine and leave. Preston smiled, a slow, predatory, deeply sadistic smile. Because of corporate compliance, Maya, he sneered softly, leaning forward. By law, every shareholder in an LLC must receive the audited corporate financial reports every single quarter. I want you to stay on that list. I want you to sit in whatever little, run-down rented apartment you end up in. I want you to open those envelopes every 3 months, and I want you to watch me turn this dirt into tens of millions of dollars. Consider it motivation, a reminder of what a real winner looks like. He didn't give me the 1% out of familial obligation. He gave it to me as an instrument of psychological torture. He specifically wanted to legally force me to watch him get rich while I struggled. But Preston's arrogance was his fatal flaw. He was so eager to finalize the LLC and get back to Wall Street that he became impatient. I was standing outside the study door later that afternoon when I heard him screaming at his lead attorney on the phone. "I don't care about drafting a new operating agreement from scratch," Preston yelled, pacing the room. "Just rush the paperwork. Poured over the old bylaws my grandfather wrote in the 60s. I'm not paying you $1,000 an hour to reinvent the wheel. Just copy and paste the foundational framework and put my name at the top." The lawyer on the other end must have cautioned him to review the old documents first, because Preston scoffed loudly. "It's a 500-acre pile of dirt, Jim. It's not a Fortune 500 company. Just file the damn paperwork so I can go home." Preston's lawyers did exactly what they were told. They copy-pasted our grandfather's original, archaic estate bylaws into the new Oakhaven Holdings LLC operating agreement. Preston was so blinded by his own ego that he didn't even bother to read the fine print of the company he just stole. He didn't realize that our grandfather, a deeply paranoid man who wanted to ensure the farm stayed in the family forever, had embedded a highly specific, radioactive legal clause deep in the bylaws. Preston had just armed the trap. All I had to do was wait for him to step on it. I moved out of Oakhaven Estate a week later. I rented a tiny, one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner in a neighboring town and started my life completely from scratch. I went strictly no contact with Preston. I blocked his number. I blocked his social media. I finally enrolled in a local community college to finish my nursing degree, working night shifts at a diner to pay my tuition. It was exhausting, but for the first time in 15 years, I was living for myself. And true to his cruel promise, Preston made sure I never forgot about him. Every 3 months, like clockwork, a thick, heavy manila envelope would arrive in my mailbox from his Manhattan law firm. Inside were the quarterly financial reports for Oakhaven Holdings LLC. I never read them. I would pull them out of the mailbox, walk straight to my kitchen trash can, and throw them away unopened. 3 years passed. I was a semester away from graduating, living a quiet, peaceful life. Then, the news broke in the local paper. Preston hadn't just been holding on to the land. He had been quietly brokering a monstrous, historic deal with Apex Global Resort Group, a massive international luxury developer. They wanted to bulldoze all 500 acres of our grandfather's pristine timber forest and build an exclusive, ultra-luxury eco-resort and golf course. The purchase price for the land? $40 million, in pure cash. Preston, holding 99% of the shares, was about to become unfathomably wealthy. But Preston was a Wall Street banker, which meant he suffered from a lethal combination of unbridled greed and impatience. He didn't wait for the ink to dry on the final sale. Assuming the $40 million was absolutely guaranteed, Preston began living like a billionaire before he actually was one. According to the gossip I heard from a former neighbor who still followed him online, Preston had taken out massive bridge loans, short-term, high-interest loans leveraged against the pending sale of the estate. He used millions of dollars in borrowed bank money to purchase a massive penthouse in Tribeca, a 60-foot yacht moored in the Hamptons, and a fleet of exotic sports cars. He was flying high, burning through borrowed cash, completely convinced that he was the smartest man in the room. He had the world on a string, until he needed my signature. It was a Tuesday morning when I received the email. It wasn't from Preston directly, of course. It was a cold, condescending email from his executive assistant, Maya. You are required to attend the final closing meeting for the liquidation of Oakhaven Holdings LLC this Friday at 10 a.m. in New York. Your presence is needed to sign a routine shareholder release formality. I printed the email, folded it neatly into my purse, and bought a train ticket to Manhattan. The corporate offices of Apex Global Resort Group were intimidating by design. Located on the 60th floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper, the boardroom offered panoramic views of the city. The table was a massive slab of polished mahogany, surrounded by men wearing suits that cost more than I made in a year. When I walked into the room, wearing my modest, off-the-rack slacks and a simple blouse, the silence was palpable. Preston was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by 3 of his aggressive estate lawyers. Across from him sat the lead developers for Apex Global and their massive legal team. When Preston saw me, he didn't stand up. He didn't greet me. He just leaned back in his leather chair, a look of profound irritation crossing his face, as if a stray dog had wandered into his pristine office. Finally, Preston sighed, checking his Rolex. Take a seat at the end of the table, Maya. Let's make this fast. We have a $40 million wire transfer to execute, and I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin. I walked quietly to the far end of the table and sat down, folding my hands in my lap. Preston slid a single, thick document across the long table toward me. He didn't slide it gently. He flicked it so hard it stopped inches from my hands. That's a standard shareholder release, Preston sneered, making sure the billionaire developers heard his condescending tone. It legally dissolves the LLC and authorizes the sale of the physical assets. Just sign on the dotted line, Maya. In fact, because I'm feeling generous today. Preston reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a sleek black checkbook, and quickly scribbled out a check. He slid that down the table, too. There's a personal check for $10,000, he smiled, his eyes cold and dead. Consider it a bonus. Now sign the paper, take the money, go back to your little apartment, and let the adults handle the real business. He was treating me like a beggar. He was trying to buy my dignity in front of a room full of powerful men, asserting his absolute dominance one final time before he cashed his $40 million ticket. I looked down at the $10,000 check. Then, I looked at the glossy, expensive pen lying next to the shareholder release document. I didn't pick up the pen. I looked up, meeting Preston's arrogant gaze from across the massive mahogany table. I'm not signing this, Preston, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in that silent, cavernous room, it rang out like a gunshot. I am not authorizing the sale of Oakhaven Estate. Preston blinked. He let out a harsh, incredulous laugh, looking at his lawyers as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. Excuse me? Preston scoffed, leaning forward. Maya, you own 1% of this company. 1%. You don't have a say in the sale. You are here to sign a formality waiver so the title insurance clears. Stop being dramatic and sign the damn paper. I didn't move. I'm not signing. Preston's face flushed with anger. He slammed his hand on the table. I hold 99% of the voting shares. I am the managing director. I don't need your permission to sell this dirt. Actually, Mr. Vance. The voice didn't come from my side of the table. It came from the lead attorney for Apex Global Resort Group. The developer's attorney, a stern, gray-haired man who had been silently reviewing a thick binder of documents, suddenly looked very, very pale. He was staring at page 12 of the Oakhaven Holdings LLC operating agreement. Mr. Vance, the developer's attorney repeated, his voice tight with sudden rising panic. She does not have to sign, but if she doesn't, we cannot execute this purchase. Preston whipped his head around to face the attorney. What the hell are you talking about? I own 99%. It doesn't matter, the attorney said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He turned the thick binder around so Preston could see it. When your lawyers drafted this LLC 3 years ago, they copy-pasted the original 1960 estate bylaws into the foundation of the new company. So what? Preston yelled, his polished veneer completely cracking. So, Article 4, Section B contains a Unanimous Veto Clause, the attorney read aloud, his finger trembling slightly on the page. It explicitly states that any action resulting in the total liquidation, sale, or destruction of the core acreage of Oakhaven Estate requires the unanimous 100% consent of all active shareholders, regardless of their equity percentage. The silence that fell over the boardroom was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and terrifying. I watched the exact moment the realization hit Preston. I watched the blood physically drain from his face, leaving him a sickly, terrifying shade of white. His jaw went slack. To liquidate the core asset, 99% was not enough. My 1% share had the exact same legal voting power as his 99% share when it came to selling the land. I stood up slowly, picking up my purse. I looked down the table at my brother, whose entire reality was currently collapsing around him in slow motion. "You didn't have to keep me on the LLC, Preston," I said. My voice was calm, clinical, and completely devoid of pity. "You could have bought me out. You could have taken 100% ownership on day one. But your ego wouldn't let you. You specifically kept me on the shareholder list just so you could legally force me to watch you get rich." Preston was hyperventilating now, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with absolute, soul-crushing terror. He knew about the bridge loans. He knew what would happen if the $40 million didn't clear today. "You armed the trap, Preston," I said softly. "You handed me the trigger. All because you couldn't resist the urge to be cruel." "Maya, please," Preston gasped, actually reaching a trembling hand out toward me. The arrogant Wall Street titan was gone, replaced by a desperate, ruined beggar. "Maya, the bridge loans. The banks will seize my penthouse. They'll take everything. I'll be bankrupt. Please, I'll give you $5 million, $10 million, just sign the paper." "Keep your money," I said. I turned my back on him and walked toward the glass doors. "I hear the financial reports are going to be very interesting next quarter. I look forward to reading them in my little rented apartment." I walked out of the boardroom, leaving my brother screaming at his lawyers, the $40 million deal officially, legally dead. The fallout was spectacular, brutal, and entirely legal. Because I vetoed the sale, the $40 million deal with Apex Global collapsed instantly. The developers, furious at the wasted time and legal fees, sued Preston for breach of preliminary contract. But the real devastation came from the banks. Preston had leveraged millions of dollars in short-term bridge loans against a sale that never materialized. When the loans came due, he couldn't pay. The banks moved in with terrifying speed. They foreclosed on his Tribeca penthouse. They seized the yacht in the Hamptons. They repossessed his cars. Preston, the golden child, the born winner my father had worshipped, was legally, completely, and utterly bankrupt. He lost his job at the investment firm due to the massive public humiliation and the lawsuits. As for me, I still own my 1% share of Oakhaven Holdings LLC. But more importantly, by vetoing the sale, I inadvertently saved my grandfather's 500 acres of beautiful timber forest from being bulldozed into a concrete resort. The land remains untouched, quiet, and peaceful. I graduated with my nursing degree last year. I work at a local hospital, helping people who actually appreciate my care. I live a quiet, beautiful life. Looking back, the destruction of my brother taught me a profound lesson about the psychology of toxic, narcissistic people. You rarely have to actively seek revenge against them. Narcissistic hubris is a disease that eventually cures itself. They will always, inevitably, engineer their own destruction because they simply cannot resist the urge to be cruel to the people they view as beneath them. Preston didn't lose his empire because I attacked him. He lost his empire because he handed me the match, poured the gasoline, and then begged me to watch the fire. If you are dealing with a toxic family member who treats you like you are invisible, hear me now. Do not fight them. Do not scream. Let them underestimate you. Let their ego blind them to the details. Walk away in silence, build your own life, and let their arrogance be the architect of their own ruin. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, or if you just love a perfectly executed, legally binding checkmate, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story.